A mass killing of civilians who came to collect their pensions in Donbass, an unexpected attack by Israel on a nearby eastern country, and how people in Nepal died because of a social media ban. We will tell you about all of this today on TSN. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, watch the broadcast, and I look forward to your comments under the episode. And here's what else we'll be talking about next. The Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine after the explosion and fire.
A Russian Iskander missile strike hit here.
TSN visited the damaged government building that was hit by a Russian missile and found out what saved the cabinet from complete destruction. Government crisis in France. The Prime Minister has resigned. Could President Macron also lose his position?
The debt is already unbearable for the state. It will become increasingly harder and more expensive.
How is one of Ukraine's main Western partners being shaken by turmoil? And could we lose Paris's support? Russian terror in Donetsk region. The occupiers struck a group of people with an aerial bomb. Everything happened in Yampil. It is now known that 24 people were killed and another 19 wounded. At least 3 of them are in critical condition. We cannot show you video footage of the aftermath of this war crime for ethical reasons, as these images are not suitable for sensitive viewers. The dead and wounded are civilians who had come to collect their pensions. The head of Ukroposhta reported that in order not to put people at risk, they constantly changed the location and method of distributing the money. This time, the vehicle from which the payments were being made was hidden under the trees to make it less noticeable. However, as Ihor Smilyansky suggests, it is likely that someone gave away its coordinates. The service vehicle was destroyed and burned out. The driver survived, but the head of the Ukroposhta branch was wounded. She has already been taken to the hospital. From Yarova to the line of combat contact is about 8 kilometers. A half-ton aerial bomb was dropped by Russian terrorists on residential neighborhoods in Kostiantynivka. This is also in Donetsk region. Preliminarily, 4 people are involved. They may be trapped under the rubble, and apartment buildings have been destroyed. Rescuers are trying to free them. During the day, the occupiers also attacked the city with artillery and FPV drones. It is known that 1 person was wounded. 2 teenagers aged 11 and 12 were injured by an unknown device in the village of Zeleny High. In Kharkiv region, the children are in the hospital in serious condition, and a resident of Izium, who also stepped on a mine, was killed. Medical assistance was also needed for a woman from the village of Veliki Burluk, who was wounded during the shelling. In Sumy region, 3 people were injured. The village of Ulyanivka was attacked by a Molnia drone. A local resident sustained multiple injuries. In the Bilopilia community, the occupiers dropped explosives from a drone onto rescuers who were extinguishing a fire after the shelling. 2 firefighters were injured and the fire truck was damaged. Russian artillery strikes destroyed and burned down the market in the center of Kherson. Dozens of city residents lost their jobs, and the inhabitants of the destroyed suburb also lost their shelter.
Everything we had burned down. So what now?
Another restless night in Zaporizhzhia. The occupiers launched more than 300 drones at the region. In the village of Primorsky, a drone killed a 62-year-old woman, and in the regional center, a Shahed struck a residential building and set it on fire, injuring a woman. TSN correspondent Daria Nazarova visited the site of the strike. She will share all the details.
They spent 4 years building a home for their big family, but the Russians destroyed it in a single night. It was another sleepless night for the city. The invaders attacked it with Shahed drones. After the explosion, this home caught fire. Alexander Ivanovich, the father of the homeowner, recognized the house in the photos taken by rescuers as they were putting out the blaze. The moment of impact was captured on surveillance camera footage.
When
he arrived at the scene after the strike, he was horrified.
This
family has suffered from Russian shelling more than once. Just 3 days ago, on September 6th, a Shahed drone fell near their yard.
It hit right there. The fence is completely gone.
The fence is completely gone.
Now, instead of a house, there is only a burnt-out shell. The people weren't here that night, so there were no casualties or injuries. A 66-year-old neighbor was affected. She had a severe stress reaction. Medical workers provided her with assistance. The victim refused hospitalization. Many of Mr. Alexander's neighbors suffered damage. The blast wave blew out windows and destroyed the roof. Daria Nazarova, Zaporizhzhia.
Evacuation from Kostiantynivka. The Russians have intensified attacks on the city. The number of people wanting to leave has increased several times over. At the same time, the risk for evacuation workers has also grown. Currently, law enforcement officers make 7 to 8 evacuation trips there per day. Under shelling, they transport up to 10 residents per trip. There are a lot of people with limited mobility who had stayed behind. Now they need to be evacuated because it's dangerous everywhere, in basements and in homes. There are frequent explosions both day and night, and destructive fires keep breaking out from continuous enemy attacks. They transport people in a heavily armored vehicle with advanced anti-drone protection and try to gather passengers as quickly and efficiently as possible to get out of the city completely unharmed. They named him Nazar. This is about a boy who was born after the shelling of Kyiv on September 7th. He was supposed to come into the world in October, but the doctors had to perform an emergency delivery to save the baby's life. My colleague Nata Ostrovska found out that the mother's name is Tetiana Sakian. She is 24 years old and is currently in critical condition with 90% of her body burned. Her husband, Vadim, is also in serious condition. They managed to stabilize him. He has burns on 85% of his body. For now, he is not able to speak. The baby's life is not in danger. He was born weighing 2 kilograms, 900 grams, and is currently being cared for by doctors. Tetiana's biological sister told TSN about all of this. Alina, at the time of the explosion, was in the next room and by some miracle did not get a single scratch. The family moved to Kyiv 6 months ago from the Kirovohrad region. The sisters have always lived together as they are orphans. Tetiana planned to give birth to her son and move to a village in the Kirovohrad region because she was afraid of the shelling. Let me remind you, a Shahed drone hit the upper floors of a high-rise building in the Sviatoshinsky district. The Yasekian family's apartment, which they were renting, was destroyed.
They saw that it was flying straight toward the balcony, and they started to run, attempting to escape, and then the powerful and destructive blast wave tragically burned them, leaving them with no chance. I quickly ran out of the area seeking safety. My phone is always with me, right by my pillow. I quickly grabbed my phone and immediately started shining the bright light. Tanya, unfortunately, had a heavy door fall on her. Vadim bravely pulled her out, and I promptly gave them my spare clothes because all of theirs had been completely burned.
For the third day, the capital's emergency workers have been dealing with the aftermath of the devastating attack on the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine building. State emergency service workers are using heavy cranes to dismantle the destroyed floors and structures. After stabilization work is completed, experts will inspect the damaged premises and determine the list of restoration tasks. This is what the government building currently looks like, as shown to Ukrainian and foreign journalists.
Wearing bright lime green helmets, journalists are being led through the dim corridors of the government building. In the right wing of the government building, on the upper floors, are the offices of the Ministers of Finance and Economy. Now there is no electricity, water stands in the corridors, and there is a strong smell of burning. This is indeed the 9th and 10th floor of the government building, or rather what is truly left of it. It was right here that a Russian Iskander missile tragically struck, and by some incredible miracle the warhead did not detonate at all. If the warhead had exploded, most of the government building would have been turned into ruins. At the site of the fire elimination, explosives experts are still finding remnants of the Russian missile. These are material evidence of yet another Russian crime. Currently, rescuers continue to clear the debris and reinforce the damaged structural elements.
There are still many unstable structures. All of this needs to be dismantled and made safe so that civilian builders and repair workers can enter, inspect, and then draw conclusions about what to do next.
On September 7th at 6 a.m., during a massive air attack, a ballistic missile struck the Cabinet of Ministers building. The fuel tank with rocket fuel exploded and a major fire broke out. The blast wave and fire partially destroyed the facade, roof, floor, interfloor coverings, and partitions. Several dozen offices were left without windows and doors. For 2 hours, rescuers tried to bring the fire under control.
The firefighting efforts were complicated by the fact that there were a lot of wooden structures in the building's elements, which caused a high fire load to spread very quickly from the very beginning. And this was already the 7th location in Kyiv. That is, the state emergency service units had already been working at 6 other sites, so the buildup of forces and resources was carried out in stages.
2 floors below the epicenter of the strike are the hall for government meetings and the Prime Minister's office. They were partially damaged. On the same day, Yulia Sviridenko published photos of the destroyed premises and assured that Russian terror would not stop the work of the government. The consequences of the Russian missile strike were seen firsthand by the heads of diplomatic missions accredited in Ukraine. They were shown not only the extensive destruction, which is direct and undeniable evidence of Russia's persistent unwillingness to move toward a lasting peace and a blatant mockery by the aggressor of the diplomatic efforts of the civilized world, said the Ukrainian Prime Minister. Ihor Bondarenko, Oleksiy Sovchuk, TSN 1+1.
The Russian attack failed in Donetsk region. Ukrainian soldiers captured 17 invaders. This was reported by the press service of the 1st Corps of the National Guard Azov. The Russian command sent the occupiers into an assault to one of the hottest spots in Donetsk region, Dobropilya. However, our armored forces successfully repelled this enemy assault and effectively stabilized the critical situation. During the intense clash, brave fighters from the 4th Rapid Response Brigade of the National Guard, Rubich, and the 82nd Separate Air Assault Bukovina Brigade managed to capture 17 enemy soldiers. Ukrainian defenders have published a compelling video featuring the captured Russian invaders, reminding the occupiers that surrendering is their only viable chance to survive. The defense forces of Ukraine have cleared Volodymyrivka in Donetsk region of enemy forces, and near 3 other villages, Razin, Zoloty, Kolodiaz, and Novotoretske, our troops have pushed the Russians back. At the same time, analysts from the Deep State portal note that Russian forces have advanced in the Serebryansky forestry area. The Pokrovsk direction remained the most difficult along the entire front line over the past day. Our troops repelled more than 60 attacks, none of them any less challenging. In the Novopavlivka direction, the occupiers are also constantly trying to attack. Overall, according to the General Staff, 195 combat engagements were recorded along the front line over the past day. In Crimea, the sky was set ablaze. Special forces from the Main Intelligence Directorate successfully struck valuable Russian targets located on the temporarily occupied peninsula. Drones successfully struck a circular surveillance radar, specifically designed for detecting aerial targets, as well as the NBM radar complex. Furthermore, the special forces then precisely hit the radar module from the NBM complex directly while it was actively on the move. The Russian occupiers were just leaving their combat duty position at that moment. The anniversary Ramstein meeting in London was held online, bringing together the 30th session of the Ukraine Defence Contact Group, also known as the Ramstein format. The meeting opened with statements from the UK Minister of Defence, John Gilly, the German Minister of Defence, Boris Pistorius, and the Ukrainian Minister of Defence, Denis Shmyhal. On the eve of the Defence Summit, he held a meeting with President Zelensky where the main priorities of Ramstein were determined. Zelensky himself spoke about this in his evening address. According to him, the number 1 task at the meeting is to discuss strengthening Ukraine's air defense. Victory for Ukraine very much means survival as an independent state indeed. Thus, in an interview with ABC television, Volodymyr Zelensky specifically answered the question of what victory for our country looks like to him. In a conversation with journalist Martha Raddatz against the backdrop of an American factory in Zakarpattia destroyed by a Russian strike, Zelensky emphasized that he is ready for any meeting with Putin, bilateral or trilateral, but not on Russian territory. Instead, he invited the Russian dictator to come to Kyiv. Zelensky also expressed the opinion that the meeting between US President Donald Trump and Putin in Alaska gave the Kremlin leader exactly what he wanted.
You know, if a person doesn't want to meet during a war, of course they can suggest something that's unacceptable to me or to others. That's understandable. I can't go to Moscow when my country is being shelled by rockets and attacked every day. I can't go to the capital of these terrorists.
Ukraine will not be able to join NATO while the war is ongoing, as this would draw alliance members into a direct military conflict with Russia. This statement was made by Polish President Karol Nawrocki in an interview with one of the Lithuanian TV channels. The politician also called discussions about our EU membership premature. This is not the first such statement by Nawrocki, but at the same time he emphasizes that he is focused on practical support for Ukraine and that Poland continues to demonstrate solidarity with Kyiv in its fight against Russian aggression. At the same time, a few weeks ago, he vetoed a government bill on social support for Ukrainian citizens, Poland above all. It was under this very slogan that Nawrocki won the presidential election in June. One of the key points of his campaign rhetoric was prioritizing Poles in access to state services and imposing restrictions on Ukrainians regarding access to doctors, schools, and social benefits. Nawrocki believes that financial support should be provided only to those refugees who are officially employed in Poland. Ukraine's future is inextricably linked with NATO and the EU. This is a guarantee of security for Europe itself. This is how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs responded to Karol Nawrocki's statement, reminding that this position is supported by the leaders of partner countries, including Poland. In addition, the member states of the Coalition of the Willing agree that Ukraine's European integration is one of the security guarantees for our country. But it is also a guarantee for Europe and the Euro-Atlantic community. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs also adds that Ukraine highly values Poland's leading contribution in supporting our country and continues to cooperate with partners for full membership in the EU and NATO. The Kremlin is losing its last clients in Europe. Hungary has signed a 10-year gas supply contract with Shell. This was announced by the country's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Péter Szijjártó. Natural gas from the new supplier will be reliably delivered to Hungary via existing German and Czech pipelines starting in the year 2026. Szijjártó also added that Budapest is negotiating with several potential suppliers. The search for alternatives is taking place against the backdrop of the EU's intention to completely abandon Russian gas by the end of 2027. Budapest, which is the last major buyer of Russian energy resources in Europe, has long resisted these intentions. But recently, the Hungarians have begun taking steps to diversify their supplies, and this is likely largely due to the efforts of Ukrainian defense forces who have struck Russian transit energy facilities, including the Druzhba oil pipeline. Political crisis in France. Parliament has passed a vote of no confidence in the government of François Bayrou. The majority voted in favor, 364 members of parliament. Now the prime minister is resigning. Bayrou had only led the government for 9 months. How will the resignation of France's prime minister affect aid to Ukraine? Our international correspondent, Iryna Zarutska, will explain in depth why the parliament of one of our closest and truly significant allies expressed a vote of no confidence in the government last night, and what crucial elections now await President Emmanuel Macron.
If you want to know what's happening in Ukraine, just get in a taxi or go to the market. In Paris, it works just the same as in Kyiv.
People here never used to look for food in the trash before. What is this even actually, huh? Just remember my words. I'm absolutely telling you the truth. France is truly finished. That's it indeed.
80-year-old street vendor Mohammed fully supports the resignation of François Bayrou's government, which had led the ruling coalition for a period of 9 months and was ultimately widely hated for a series of highly unpopular proposals. Freezing the indexation of social benefits and pensions, limiting state medical insurance, eliminating certain government agencies, and, worst of all, tampering with the sacred. The cancellation of 2 out of 11 public holidays, specifically Easter Monday and May 8th. All of this is because Ukraine currently has a very huge national debt that somehow needs to be repaid.
Prime Minister Bayrou
has already presented a number of public proposals on how to reduce the budget deficit by 44 billion euros, but the political parties in Parliament have made it clear to him that there is no chance of passing these laws through Parliament. He acted on real political orders instead of waiting for a political execution to take place.
Bayrou's latest speech in Parliament was an attempt to convince the deputies that the national debt needs to be reduced. Everyone knows how this will end.
That is all.
What we are facing today is not a political matter, but a historical issue. Ms. Stepanova, you have enough power to topple the government, but you have no power over reality. Expenses will continue to significantly rise. The financial debt, already quite unbearable for the state, will only become much heavier and more expensive to manage.
After rather sharp statements from both the far left and the far right parliamentarians, the vote proceeded exactly as expected.
For now then, truly,
For the government, 194 deputies voted in favor while 364 voted against. According to the constitution of the 50 states, the Prime Minister must immediately resign from the government. So Bayrou became the third Prime Minister to resign in the past 12 months, a notable political occurrence. This political crisis in France was triggered last year by Macron's personal decision to dissolve the parliament. By dissolving the National Assembly and all.
And calling new parliamentary elections, Macron played political roulette, hoping that the elections would strengthen his party, but the electorate punished him by electing a deeply divided assembly. No one has any real power.
France is one of Ukraine's key European allies. That's why the state of health of the assembly is almost a matter of strategic importance for us. As a result, the Prime Minister is left hanging, and now French citizen Mohamed already knows for sure. If elections are called again soon, he will vote for the far-left Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Mélenchon openly does not support Putin, but he firmly claims that Ukraine and NATO significantly provoked Russia.
Whether you like him or not, he is principled. People like him have never been allowed into power by Macron and his associates, so we really need to see what they are truly capable of.
There are no populists on our side in France because giving up cheap Russian gas really hits people's wallets. And all the political opponents of the current president are taking advantage of this. Political scientist Douglas Weber sees three possible scenarios for President Macron.
First, Macron could appoint a new prime minister to the post, for example, Bayrou. Second, he could dissolve
Parliament, much like the Tories did, and set a definitive date for new elections, hoping that the distribution of seats in the parliament among the various political parties will significantly change. Or, in a more dramatic and impactful scenario, he could resign himself and call for presidential elections.
The option of early presidential elections is the least likely. Macron himself had previously promised that he would not do this. Both of the other options risk undermining French support for Ukraine. After all, the new prime minister, just like Bayrou, will have to approve the budget for the next year. The important question of exactly where to get the necessary money will inevitably arise again.
Without a new and approved budget, France cannot spend more money on important international issues or its foreign policy initiatives. And this situation, for example, could significantly affect opportunities for both the nation of France and the country of Ukraine.
Janas Lazarchuk, Victoria Pozimena, TSN1+. Yen?
19 people have died in Nepal as a result of clashes between angry youth and the police, with more than 100 injured. The street protests began because of censorship. Demonstrators set fire to government buildings, the residences of the president, the prime minister, and ministers. And they eventually achieved their goal. The authorities once again allowed the use of social networks. At the beginning of the month, the government had banned most popular messengers and networks, including Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and YouTube. This led to mass demonstrations in many cities. Prime Minister Sharma Oli resigned today, but so far this hasn't effectively helped. The persistent protesters continue to actively attack former and current government officials, whom they accuse of widespread and rampant corruption. And now tell us, is there any social network or messenger in Ukraine that, if it were up to you, you would also prefer to ban? And on the other hand, would you be ready, for example, to go out and protest if you were left without Telegram, Instagram, Tinder, or YouTube? Write about all this right here on YouTube in the comments to this broadcast, and of course give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and the TSN episode continues. Several powerful explosions shook the Qatari capital, the Israeli military reported. This was a targeted strike directed specifically against members of the Hamas terrorist group. Qatar officially provides asylum to several of its leaders. Israel has named them responsible for the October 7th attack and for coordinating the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip. Whether any of the Hamas leaders have been eliminated as a result of the strike has not yet been reported. The murder of 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee Iryna Zarutska in the United States is at the center of a political scandal. Over the weekend, the police released surveillance camera footage from a commuter train in the city of Charlotte, North Carolina. Late in the evening, the Ukrainian woman was returning from work, looking at something on her phone, when the attacker, who was sitting behind her, suddenly stood up and inflicted several stab wounds on the victim. Zarutska died at the scene. The investigation established that they did not know each other. The police consider the murder to be unmotivated. President Donald Trump responded to the crime. In a post on the social network Truth Social, he emphasized that the attacker, 34-year-old black man DeCarlos Brown, was mentally ill, a criminal offender who had been detained and released by the police 14 times. The last time, in January of this year, the man was released without bail. Therefore, Trump blamed his political opponents, the Democrats, for the fact that he was walking free. In particular, he pointed to the party's representatives in law enforcement and the city mayor, Sharvod. In recent weeks, the U.S. president has been actively declaring a fight against street crime, even deploying the National Guard to patrol the streets. Meanwhile, the mother of the man who killed the Ukrainian woman blames the courts for allowing her son, who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, to have such freedom of action. The deceased, Iryna Zarutska, together with her family, left Ukraine for the United States to escape the war.